Hello, everyone. It is Wednesday. We're here with Ricky Williams and our special guest today, Debbie DeStefano. Now, Debbie comes to us to the Moira Press School. Well, she is her own teacher. She's one of our favorite teachers at the Moira Press and also a student at the Moira Press because we teach advanced astrologers, but she kind of teaches the intro students on her side of things. And so, Debbie, how long have you been studying astrology?
I've been studying astrology from the late 90s and but got serious about it probably around 10 years ago. 50, I was teaching 15 years ago, so about that time when I started getting serious about it.
Wait, so as soon as you started getting serious, you started teaching?
I was thrown into that. I didn't ask to teach. They told me you're teaching. And I'm like, what? And they're like, yeah. My one of my mentors, the late great Ken Negus, he was my mentor, and he wanted me to teach, and I was basically told I have to teach. That was it. And so I just slipped. I thought it was a great opportunity, and it was, and it always has been. So, and every year I hope that I get better and better at what I'm doing. It's quite an honor to be able to teach people,
Yeah.
to help.
Well, we'll
Yeah.
get ready to be schooled by you.
What was that?
We'll get ready to be schooled by you today. So am I allowed to talk about your chart, Debbie? I know you're kind of private.
Sure. Yeah, that's okay.
Well, Debbie has a Mercury opposed Mars, so she's a good talker. She's like very verbal and vocal, and I like that about her. So, Ricky, I know you can see her chart there, but it's kind of a fun Mercury. So, I thought today we could just kind of talk to you, Debbie, about your generation, the Pluto and Leo generation. We've had one other Pluto and Leo astrologer on the show. But to just talk about the generational trends around, culture and identity and race and gender and all these kinds of things. And then maybe just look at your personal lens in doing readings and how you handle things. So I guess, let's start with this. In your Pluto and Leo generation, how do you think race relations or culture relations have morphed over throughout your life?
It's it was tough back in the 60s and the 70s. That was a big that was during the time when there was a lot of riots. There was a lot of things about you have to understand that when you came from the Pluto Cancer into Pluto Leo, this was coming from a very conservative point of view to now things are going to be, the new generation was going to be in charge. And there was a creative kind of thing about this whole thing about Pluto and Leo, where people wanted their own freedom. They wanted to do what they wanted to do it, the way they wanted to do it. And so when you talk about the racial thing, that was a big thing. There were riots about that. So because they were still coming from that conservative point of view to a new kind of view where everybody wanted to be accepted. The hippies back in the 60s, they wanted, and those people that were from the 60s, you have to understand at that point in time, Pluto had already ingressed into to Virgo, but it was those people who were born during the time when they were born with Pluto and Leo. They were the movers and shakers. They were the people who were going to shake things up with their own creative ways of doing things. And so they rebelled a lot of things. There was a lot of rebellion, uh, particularly about racial issues, particularly about anything that was conservative. They were going to, kick butt on that. They were like, I'm not doing that. We're going to do it our way.
Interesting. Any comments on that, Ricky?
Well, yeah, I have a comment more about the line of questioning.
Okay.
You know, and I think we're kind of touching on it a little bit. I think culture, the word culture comes from the word cultivate, uh, and it's in a the new moon in Cancer. I'm just feeling it. So that a chart is like a seed planted in culture, and so it grows out of that culture. And so I think the line of questioning is, to me, is more, how do you think the times that you were born in and grew up in affected the expression of your chart. Now, one of the things that it's a thought experiment that my teacher uses when he's trying to get someone to connect to Uranus. And he says, imagine if you were born in a different time and in a different culture, right? Is that the cultural norms that you would have been aligned with or growing up in would have been different. And it would have changed the expression of your originality because certain things would have blocked certain parts of your originality and some things would have allowed it to express more depending on the cultural mores of that time. So I think you can look at, to me, what comes to mind is in my system, I rate the planets. And the two, and you pointed out, I mean, the ranking system is more for validation. The strongest planet in this chart is Mercury, and the second strongest is Mars. So without even looking, I know the strongest dynamic in the life has been the Mercury Mars opposition. And so I'm curious, a woman growing up, in the 60s, right, with that strong Mars in the seventh, right, it's going to manifest one way in certain cultures, and it's going to manifest completely differently in other cultures. And to me, I think to me that feels rich, more rich than a commentary, than a external commentary on a certain generation, but more the lived experience of the chart manifesting through that generation.
All right. Well,
I,
yeah. Go ahead, Debbie.
Yeah, no, you know what? I totally agree with that. And for me, the way I would fight, because my Mars is in Pisces, there was a lot of times when I just pulled back and I would fight my own way in the sense of like, I'm gonna do things my way. But I had issues being that my my history, my ancestry is both Russian and Ukrainian and Italian. And back when I was in second grade, I was 7 years old. And they say, oh, yeah. And it used to be that, it wasn't like you said, so, where are you from? You wouldn't say American back then. You'd say what your ancestry was, where your parents came from, your grandparents, whatever. And I said, Russian. Oh, I'm part Russian. Oh, are you a commie? I'm 7 years old in second grade, and somebody actually said that to me. I'm like, oh my God, because that was scary to think that somebody would think you're a communist
Mm.
back then. So I never revealed ever again, that I was part Russian.
Yeah. So,
You know,
so
that was part
interesting.
of my ancestry.
Yeah,
Yeah.
interesting. So, right, I think, right, in this sense, culture, soil, the way I'm talking about it, to me feels like the fourth house, ruler of the fourth, Sagittarius on the cusp of the fourth, different culture in the 12th, So I'd imagine if we could remember the exact date, that we would have seen some activation to that 12th house Jupiter, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
Um, there was a lot of things I don't remember because, like there were things like Woodstock. I was 13 years old when Woodstock came around. I would have loved to have gone. My parents had no clue to be able to go to that or anything. But you know what? All the people that were born during that time, they're the ones who brought it forward during the time when Pluto actually went back, was in Virgo and went into Virgo. And it did affect our health. It affected the way we looked at our health and the way we served people and the way we softened it up as it went from Leo to Virgo. But during that time when the people, particularly the people who were born in the 1940s, they were the ones who were the rebels. They were the ones who they were the baby boomers and Pluto was already about into 11 degrees of Leo at that point.
Yeah, I am curious about the Pluto and Cancer because we haven't had people who have really spoken to that time period in history on the show before. And it's like that would make sense where we go from a time period where the the water of the chest is really activated, and so people are very protective of their home and family. And it's like, if you look at like feminist theory, it's like you need to be at home, pregnant in the kitchen, kind of thing. Like that's very Pluto and Cancer. Whereas maybe the Pluto and Leo generation becomes more of the feminist generation, and like the women standing strong because it makes a very strong heart, right? And so it's like I do think that is interesting going from Pluto and Cancer into Pluto and Leo and saying that the cultural shift went from protection of self and family unit to expression of self, which busts open the family unit in some way. Is that kind of how you experienced it?
Yeah, not only that, well, you have to understand, my parents,
There we
they were
go.
the first generation of Americans. My grandparents came from Italy and from Russia and from Ukraine. Okay. So talk about that. When I think about my parents, they were basically on their own because their parents coming from Europe and Asia, they had to readjust to home. Talk about Pluto, it's kind of like, that whole transformational trip from where they came from to a whole new different home
Hmm.
when it was in Cancer.
Hmm.
And it was in Cancer for about 30 years. And so, yeah, when my grandparents, they were experiencing that where they had to do that. So our parents were kind of like lost in a sense because they really were on their own. They had to figure out things on their own.
Which is its own a cultural effect. It's like if you move and you immigrate from another country, that, I mean, what does that do to your culture and your chart? I mean, how do you cultivate, as Ricky's using that word, like how is your chart cultivating itself differently in the country of origin versus the country that you've immigrated to?
Well, I think if you look at the chart, it's going to be part of the story, right? Again, I'm a like a astrologist, where I think everything comes from the chart. So it meaning it all fits into the story, right? As you can see the different activations. And I feel like what I've been doing the most or thinking about the most lately relative to astrology is bringing it out of the conceptual airs and bringing it down to real life, because I think the conceptual things that we're talking about in real life, they have to deal with reality in order to manifest. And so that's why I'm saying we can talk conceptually and theoretically about Pluto and Leo, but to me, unless we're talking to someone who was there or whose parents were there and they're talking about those experience, or we're seeing how whatever we think the books say or conceptually how it actually manifested in real life. And that teaches us, one, it validates our astrology, but two, it teaches us how the world works. And I think, at least for me, that's kind of the whole point of why I do this. And so, it's yes, Pluto and Leo, but Pluto at the end of Leo. So most of the experiences that are remembered or conscious were Pluto in Virgo, and especially if there are planets or important points in Virgo. So I'm curious, talking about generations of as Pluto went over or conjuncted the Jupiter and Pluto entered your first house, because that would have been the real life manifestation of the Pluto and Leo seed, right? But that's taking root with Pluto and Virgo. So it's manifesting through the environment of what was going on in the 60s.
Any thoughts
Yeah.
on that, Debbie?
Uh, my childhood was really tough. My parents were they weren't educated and they weren't great parents, and they did the best they could. I give them that. They did the best that they could. But they had a lot of problems because they really didn't know what they were doing.
Okay.
You could probably see it being having Saturn in the third house. I had an older sister who was more of a mother to me than my parents were. But when I liked being a Leo, I liked the artistic. I did theater for a bit. I really love that part of that generation. The music to me in the 60s and 70s were the best. They were the best. And that's just my opinion based on my own experiences. I loved that. I still love that music. I love that music. It changed the world. Yes, I still love, jazz from the 40s. I love music from that generation too. But there was a switch that got flipped. And not only that, I mean, because Pluto not only was in Leo at that time, you had Neptune in Libra. This was all about the arts. And Uranus was in Gemini at that point in time. This was about music. This was about the artistic part of music. And when you talk about Leo, I think of that as dramatic arts dramatic arts. So we had fine arts and we had the music and we had people writing stories about what was going on historically. It was a pivotal time, I think, during that time. Anytime Pluto, I think, goes into a new sign, particularly if it's going to stay there for a while, is going to be very impactful. Just as it is now, it's on the opposite side, being in Aquarius. It's the opposite sign of what it was back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. Yeah,
That's
it's
crazy to
it's
think that it's in the opposite sign as the Pluto and Leo generation. Like you guys are starting to have your Pluto oppositions. Like what the heck? I mean, and just building on what Ricky's saying about your personal charts, like I'm very curious about your Sun Pluto conjunction in Leo of like, are you a pivotal figure in that generation? Because your Sun being on the Pluto is like you are that embodiment of that generation, in your son. And it's like, did you personally want more freedom than, I mean,
absolutely. My parents were, I was under the thumb of them, It was just like and I was a rebel. I was a total rebel, but I did it quietly. It was in the 12th house. I knew how to manipulate it so that I could do whatever I wanted to do. Did I lie a lot? Not a lot. I just twisted truth a little bit to get where I had to survive. I mean, there were times, and I'm going to be real honest, some people might get really kind of shocked when I say this on YouTube, but there was a time when I wanted to kill myself because I didn't think I could live this life anymore with my parents. And there was some weird thing. I had a lot of spiritual experiences in my life that things happened that were just amazing that turned my whole thinking away. The day I wanted to kill myself, I was 13 years old and I thought,
and
I
that
wonder
Saturn was,
what,
sorry, the Saturn was that was Saturn was hitting your Sun Pluto square Saturn at that time. Like that is
yes.
a hard transit for your chart. I mean that, and culturally we don't know how to deal with suicidalism or like extreme tests of the will to live.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I decided I wanted to see what 45 years old looked like. I don't know why I picked that number or that age, but I just said, I wonder what 45 years old will I be different? My brother saved me in a house that was on fire. I was in a house that was on fire. He was there. He never come back. Me and my friend, we were crazy. She was lighting, it was the 70s. We were lighting candles everywhere. And we decided to make a drip candle down in the basement. My brother knocked on the door. I don't know why. It was mid-July, and he decided can I hang out with you guys? And if I had said no, get out of here, it's just us girls, I would have been dead. He came in, we were downstairs, we heard noises upstairs, and the whole house was on fire. We were down in the basement. Came up and I saw smoke everywhere and I ran to the front door. I blacked out. I don't remember anything. And my friend was going to walk into her room that was fully ablaze and he grabbed her by the collar and then took the three of us to open the door and get out of there. And my mother called the fire department, but he saved my life. He saved me and my friend's life. And I knew then that there was a higher power. And I think that's why I have that when I go by my Placidus chart because I have Jupiter, Sun, Pluto in that. And I think there's some sort of spiritual empowerment that I got through some higher power that said, you have a purpose in this life. You have to be here. And I
That's your
think that's what
12th
our
house.
sun,
That's your
yeah,
12th. So, Ricky, I want to take an aside for a second. Now, I know this is not pertinent to the episode, but how do you think different cultures react to suicide thinking? Like, is there, I mean, because I know in white American culture, they'll put you right in the psych ward. That's just all, that's what they do.
Yeah, I mean, um, I think I mean, that's the culture's way of dealing with the 12th house. So I think that's how you would, that's actually the research question of how do they handle suicide. And if you do a report, you'll get a really good sense of that culture's relationship to the 12th house. And people who have strong 12th house placements, right, will bring those things to the surface.
Interesting. Yeah, because it's like 12,000 institutions and places where you get locked up, basically. And it's also maybe like this sorrow and self-undoing place. So like when you're in these sorrowful moments, they'll just be like, all right, it's time to lock you up, isolated from. But I would imagine in some cultures, like more tribal cultures, like if somebody is suicidal, they look at the tri I've heard of tribes looking at the health of the tribe to try to understand why the person doesn't have a will to live. And you know, I mean, like I think there are much more spiritual ways of looking at that conundrum. You know,
Well, my sense of the cultures that are aware of it don't deal with the issue because it's a manifestation of there's no other way for this to express in the culture, so I'm out, you know. And I think right, I think you know, I imagine indigenous cultures when someone is thinking about suicide, it means that they need to go on a vision quest,
which is
and
still
Yeah.
12th house.
that feels very 12. It feels very 12th house, yeah. Mhm.
Oh, interesting.
One thing I was going to say, and it comes back to something I said earlier, is yes, Pluto and Leo, but again, my mom's born Pluto and Leo, but at the very end. So most of the meaning, right? We can see the seed was planted, right? It's like someone who they're born and their parents get divorced when the kid's like 1.5 or 2, right? And then they don't see the father. It's like, yes, the genetics are there and there's influence there, but the environment that is actually manifesting the real life events, okay, is a different environment. And so I'm curious, the seed planted with Pluto and Leo, and it's a unique version, right? It's a delicacy for Pluto and Leo. Right? The ones at the very end, because right? You get more change. It's more dynamic because it's aligning with the changes that are going on in culture. And so for me, the question was, I wonder, to me, Mercury, the strongest planet, I wonder what happened when Pluto was caught up to the Mercury.
Mm.
That was the question. That was the question in my mind. And Pluto caught up to the Mercury at age 13. Okay, among other things, of course, but Pluto caught up at age 13.
So it'd be Pluto also opposed to Mars. So for everyone who's watching, okay, Debbie is a Virgo rising with Mercury and Virgo opposed Mars in Pisces at like 23 degrees or something like that. So Ricky's saying by age 14, Pluto is on that. Okay.
Yeah, Pluto was right there active. So part of what we're talking about, and maybe it came because I asked the question in my mind, and somehow, it got picked up in the ethers. But it's a perfect example of what I'm talking about because it is Pluto, but that Pluto is manifesting in the culture. So, right, Pluto brings things that are buried to the surface, okay, and different things are buried in different generations, and that's what Pluto is picking up on, is right, because I think to me, Pluto, the stuff that's buried can't really be dealt with because it's buried until it's activated and comes to the surface. And the first thing, we get scared because we remember why we buried it in the first place. But once we get over that, we can actually do something about it. We can grow, we can change, we can evolve, we can regenerate these fossil fuels.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Do you think you
Um,
were mentally aggravated at that time? I mean, I know that you were suicidal, but I mean, do you think mentally or verbally you were, you know, fighting the culture at that point?
I think I was lost. I mean, I was in 12th house. I was lost and trapped in my own, like, you're in like a forest. It's the only way I could describe it. You're like in this dark forest and you don't know which way to go. Because you don't have parental guidance. They didn't have the knowledge or they didn't have the the goods to be able to be good parents. So I had no guidance. I had to depend on my sister. I had to depend on friends. I mean, that's why friends to me, I think, are so important for me because the people that I chose to be with, I looked for people that would be, oh, they're on the right path. Let me see what they're doing. I mean, I took many different paths before I got when I finally found myself, but yeah, having that Pluto and the Sun conjunct in that 12th house it was an interesting trip. Let's just put it that way.
Okay.
I'm blessed. I feel very blessed to have that. And I think that anybody who is at the end of that Leo, I mean, people that are my age that in that we're in that and of course they have different houses and their sun was in different signs, but they had to deal with that Pluto still at the very end of Leo.
Mhm.
And it's like, when you're born into that, it's like it's intense. There's an
Yeah.
intensity in your
Well,
life.
Ricky, I have to address the point that you keep making, and I think it's a great point, which is if you may be born with Pluto and Leo, but if you grow up in the culture of Pluto and Virgo, like that, you're enculturated under Pluto and Virgo. As a kind of mechanical scientific astrologer, I would actually say that the soul senses machine of Debbie is wired with a Pluto in the dermatome of Leo. Like her heart is wired as a Pluto and Leo, but she wasn't culturated in Pluto and Virgo, and so I hear your point, and I just want to say I adore your
Because
point.
yeah, because especially as the Pluto goes and activates that powerful Mercury and that powerful ascendant, it's mixing Pluto and Virgo, right? And it's cool to think about, but that mix can only come in the form of life, right? It's something born there, but it's mixing and having and being right. It's like if you were born 10 years earlier, it might have been easier, right? Because there's more of that vibe still there. But it's like almost
Right.
to a foreign land. And we we
But
we all know that the distinction and the differences between one sign and the one right after.
yeah, but you know what? But what's really great is when Pluto finally did go into Virgo, then there was power through healing. And there were different ways that people were, like especially like the Beatles, they were talk about how they influenced the people from moving from Pluto and Leo into Virgo. They did yoga. They brought into that and they introduced yoga and all Eastern kind of health remedies. So, once you transitioned into that and you got to feel that, it was like, oh, there are some remedies here. We can remediate this in some
Hmm.
way
Interesting.
through Pluto in Virgo,
Huh.
Yeah,
you
it's
know?
beautiful. It's beautiful. I think Andy, one of the things that I'm realizing is it's difficult to view the chart through culture because it forces us to take a step outside of ourselves and appreciate how much we've been affected by. And I think it's hard to create that sense of separation. Is that our experiences of intensity, right? And when I hear someone saying, something is intense, is intense, is intense, right? To me, like that expression means that there's an expectation that it shouldn't be. And that expectation can only come from culture.
Hmm.
It's like raised with my mom, right? If something is not intense, we're like, what's going on? So, and that's culture, right? Because, if you raise in a slave culture, intensity for a lot of them was part of survival. And so there wasn't this complaining of this is intense, right? It's more of an appreciation of that intensity because that's the environment that they're growing up in. And the
Yeah.
people who had strong Plutos were the ones that had the ability to thrive because they could tolerate that kind of intensity. And
Mhm.
that comes from culture. So what I teach my students is I say, look at a chart and say, what would be the ideal environment for this chart? And you can even do that for specific placements, right? How does this placement feel about being a woman? How does this placement feel about being a man? How does this placement feel about being white? How does this, right? Is that, and you can start to get a sense of how culture and astrology where they overlap. And I think that's extremely important to not to have that kind of objectivity to appreciate how this all actually works.
Well, I'm coming to believe it's kind of like a cake, right? Like it's like the culture, because we can separate it out conceptually. We can say, okay, there's these four influences that we keep coming back to, genetics, culture, climate, and the chart. But when you really look at what that looks like in the melding of a human, it's like a cake, right? It's like you have the cake, which might be the chart, and then you have this frosting, but it's like it's almost like a marble cake where all the frosting is like mixed in. If the culture is the frosting, it's like it's all mixed in, and if you take a bite of it, you get it all, right? Like
Yeah.
you can't really suss it out like that. I mean, you can, but. So can we bring Debbie into the modern day here? So Debbie, now do you read charts?
Oh, yes.
Okay. So I want to know how culture informs a reading for you. Like, do you take into account the gender of the person you're reading for example? And if so,
Well, not so much the gender, but the energies in the chart that could be much more introverted or extroverted. I also would take into consideration the generation that they come from and what they're dealing with like what I just explained how I had to deal with whatever I was the same with them, whatever their age is, whatever their generation is coming from, because that is an impact in their natal chart.
mm.
It's definitely an impact on their
So you're
chart.
looking at it through the lens of the outer planets?
Not necessarily, no, everything. I look at everything, but I'm just saying I take that into consideration since we're talking about Pluto. I take into consideration all the planets and what their placements are and everything. As far as I don't do gender as much. I mean, you know, and especially at this point in time, and you know, people are choosing their genders or they are identifying with different genders. So I don't take that into consideration. I just respect whatever gender they are associated with, what they say they are.
So maybe we're not understanding the question here. Like, because to me, I don't think it's possible to not take gender into consideration. I don't think it's
Oh,
possible.
okay, but please explain. Well, okay,
I mean,
in
like
what
when you're
way?
sitting there with it's like a man or a woman, would you read a chart similarly if it was a man, a woman, or somebody who's multi-gendered?
I
Uh,
mean, I don't know. I see when I do a reading, the first thing I do is I have a meeting with them and ask them what their focus is on what they want me to look at. If it has to do with their gender, yeah, I might look at that. But to me, that's not a. I'd love to hear more from you, Ricky, as to what you mean by that, because to me, the gender is not as important as whatever the energies are in the chart in itself.
yeah, I guess that's where maybe I think that's why we're doing this podcast to change because there's a miss here. Like to me, if you think of what affects someone more than anything, is their gender. Even before you're born, your parents are trying to think pink or blue.
Ricky's a gender tripper, Debbie. He
I,
trips on gender.
Okay.
100%, 100%. But please correct me where I am off because I'd rather be accurate than tripping. Okay, so correct me where I'm off. I'm trying to understand even the energy to like the amount of energy it requires to change your gender, how it affects every single thing in your life. It's still gender. And when I say gender, I don't mean the polarity. I mean the acknowledgement that gender affects everything. That's all. And maybe to me it's so obvious, but it's weird to me how people pretend like it doesn't. That's so
Well, and
strange
that
to me.
is why we're doing the activist work of this podcast. I mean, I actually think, Ricky, that the fact that you're so passionate about this in the moment is making my heart sing because it's like you and I are actually passionate about these topics, and we do think that a chart is expressed differently in each case. I don't think Debbie's wrong for not considering gender. I think that's how astrologers have been trained in some ways, as to say the
100%,
chart is the
100%.
chart. You know what I mean? And so, like, Debbie, are you kind of making the case that the chart it doesn't really matter if it's male, female. I mean, I guess, okay, let's go into animal species. Would you
Thank
consider it
you.
if it was the chart of a horse versus a human?
Oh, hmm. I never thought about this. Honest to God, I never really thought about
Leave
this.
it to us young. We're the young people. Okay. Sorry,
No,
Debbie.
no, let me just ask a question based on this because I'm not, this is so like radical for me. Okay, so let me just so like say we're talking about Venus. So does this mean that, if someone how does that affect gender? I mean, when you think about Venus, okay, we think of the feminine or we think of the moon as feminine. But men, men who are real, like they're masculine men, they have Venus and moon in their charts. So to me, I don't understand. So tell me how that would work out. I'm fascinated by what you guys are
We have
saying.
overstimmed Debbie successfully. Um,
Please do tell. I mean,
I don't know. We're gonna need 100 more episodes. Let's see. Now, Ricky, do you want to speak to that or should I?
Well, I'll throw an example out, and maybe we can have a discussion about it if it's interesting enough. Okay, so this is an example that I've seen. Okay, is looking at a woman's chart who has the sun in the seventh house, and looking at a man's chart who has the sun in the seventh house.
hmm
That patterns emerge in both cases, and if you took note of the patterns, they'd be very different.
In what
Of
way? In what way?
All right, so I was looking at in classes that I do, we put up charts, and I just put up a chart and we just start talking about it. And so oftentimes if it's a woman's chart and the sun is in the seventh, then we spend a lot of the time talking about the partner. If we're talking about a man's chart and the sun is in the seventh, we don't spend a lot of time talking about the partner.
Mm. Well, and I agree with Ricky there because I think culturally what we're taught is it's okay to be a codependent female, basically living for your male partner and like to be like your job in life is to be your husband's partner. I feel like that is culturally appropriate. Whereas in the a man's world, like it's like you can't live for your wife. I mean, you could, you'd be like a sub milk toast, I don't know, kind of.
Okay, so I have to say, this is fascinating. So my son, okay, is in Leo. It's pretty masculine, right? In the 12th house, but I, maybe because it is conjunct at Pluto in Leo, maybe there's something about it because I never think of my partners as I'm a codependent ever, ever. I don't feel that way. I feel like, we're equal partners. That's the way I think about it. I don't know how anybody else, I don't even know if my husband feels that way. I know that's the way I feel. Maybe it's a little narcissistic on my part to say that.
Well,
But
I understand what you're saying, but it's kind of besides the point because we're not talking about the seventh house, right? We can get into a discussion about the sun. So I'll tell you something that I teach and I practice it, but it's not rigid, and there's a narrative behind it. Okay, it's the idea that at least for the first half to three quarters of life, right? If you look at a woman's sun, it's going to describe a lot of the men in her life. Okay, sons, brothers, close friends, fathers, right? You're going to feel the quality of the woman's sun and the men in her life, and even how important men are. You know, and in the same thing in a man's chart, you see the moon. You're going to get a sense of women in that man's life and how the role they play. Okay, and another part of the story is I was talking to someone, and one of my students mentioned something they read in a book that says a man becomes more like his moon later in life, and a woman becomes more like her sun later in life. And at first I was like, that's stupid. That's silly. But then I thought about relationship, right? Is that no doubt, right? I've become more feminine because of the women in my life, and that the women in my life definitely have become more masculine because I'm in their life, right? Because they're having to deal with a man. So, right, for better or worse, that's gonna make anyone more masculine, right?
I
And just
never, I'm trying to soak this in. I'm
it's
soaking
just
it
an
in.
idea. I say it's an idea to play with. It's a lens to look through. And for me, when I've looked through this lens, it's like it's so powerful for me because in my chart, the sun is the weakest planet, the moon is the strongest planet. And if you take stock of my life, the most meaningful people in my life have all been women. Grew up in a
Hmm.
house full of women, women, women. And even if you look at the nature of my moon, it describes the women. My moon is in Cancer. My wife has moon in the first, right? Powerful moon. My first wife, Cancer rising, right?
Hmm.
My moon is parallel Saturn. Okay, it's all these Saturn women in my life. My mom, my sisters, my wives. So, and it's right. It's the lessons. It's the things that I'm experiencing through the feminine. The women have more access to that than I do
Hmm.
originally.
I do like your point, Debbie, though, because I do think the Pluto and Leo generation with the Neptune in Libra did a lot of work for feminism because of the strong-hearted nature of the Pluto and Leo. It's like you're like, oh, like I'm not codependent. Like you're not built codependent. And I think if we look at that from a gendered lens, it's like how is the Sun Pluto conjunction in Leo different in a female than a male, right? Like the male version of that might look like a total Machiavellian kind of just like,
Exactly.
oh, I'm the best thing that
Exactly.
ever lived. But if you take the female version, this I'm just overlaying gender with it, we would say this is a strong chick. This is a tough chick. Like Debbie's tough, you know? And so it's like I think what Ricky and I are just kind of doing is like weaving them together and being like, take Sun Pluto in this and this, and then like say, how does it inform the equation? And so there's no right or wrong answer. And if Ricky beats you up, I'll referee.
Mars in the seventh.
Listen,
I saw the chart.
I
I saw the
love
chart.
this. I
Just
I
talk
saw the
over him, Debbie. Just talk over him.
I saw the Mars in the seventh, and I'm like, I got my boxing gloves on. I was like, yes.
Mars in the seventh house, and I do it very gently though. But yeah,
She's gonna get out her pendulum and ask it if she should hit you. No, this is good talk. Well, okay. So let's just keep fighting. Okay, so Debbie, then now, do you consider culture like race or ethnicity when you're reading a chart?
um, hmm, no. I think of people. I'm really. I have kind of like a very homogeneated kind of. People are people. Honest to God, I just see people as people. It's just, I don't think of them as a gender. I don't think of them as, what ancestry they have. I don't think of anything. Color, race, religion. We're all people. I know that just sounds so hippie-like, but that's where I guess that has a lot to do with my
That's
upbringing
your
and where I
chart.
came from.
Exactly. This is our point. This is 100% our point. Right. And if we're not aware of this layer, we're gonna miss a lot. That
Well,
I
and
think
Oh,
I do think it's beautiful what Debbie's got going on. That's like the Mars and Pisces, like we're all the same. The chart trumps everything. Like spirit is first, souls only. And I think the souls only approach is beautiful. Like I actually think, in some ways that's more beautiful than being like, well, if there's a man and he's got a chart, well, so there's something beautiful, and we're just the younger gen. We're just young upstarts, Debbie. Just don't take offense to us. Like,
and as my biggest mentor, Ken Negus, he told me the very first day that I was teaching, I was in tears afterwards because I thought, I don't know what I'm doing. Why am I here? And he was listening quietly in his kitchen. He comes out and he could see my face. I was like ready to just fall apart into a puddle. And he says, the best teachers are the ones who learn from their students. That still gets to me. And I'm telling you, I don't care how long you've been teaching, how long you've been doing astrology, you always learn something new. And I welcome that. I just love all this. It's good. It's good stuff. Good stuff.
yeah, I mean, so Ricky
yeah.
and I are stirring the pot, right? Like we're just being like, no, but add it all in and do all the things. And it's like I think you get into trouble when you add in culture and race because you're like, well, now you start getting into all those hot button issues that we kind of try to avoid in astrology. Like we're saying it's your soul, it's not all these things. But like we're kind of like our generation's kind of like, but what if you, but it's like identity politics and this and that. And like, so I think it's cool that you don't consider ethnicity. And though
I'm even wondering when is it going to be when Solar Fire just puts it, just kind of stops putting in, are you a male or a female in there? Think, like to me, I'm just rolling with it. Whatever, people are people. I've lived long enough on this planet to know how things have shifted. And I'm actually going to be experiencing Pluto in an opposition to my Pluto, you know, not maybe not to that degree, but just the energy is the same. You could feel the shift from Capricorn to Aquarius. It's just,
Have you
it's
ever imagined?
different.
Have you ever imagined having a penis?
I have
No,
several,
I
Ricky.
love being a female.
No.
No way, no way.
That's
I
I love being a man, but I've imagined having a vagina.
really,
Yeah,
that's
he is a
wild.
gender freak.
100%, I've imagined it. Like I
Yeah.
imagine what would it feel like? What would it feel like to be penetrated, right? And just what would it feel like to be able to have a child? What would it feel like to be able to provide sustenance from my body? I've thought about all this a lot.
Have you
See,
thought
I've
about
never
how it would
thought
change your
about that.
chart?
And I have never ever thought about that ever. To me, it's just I'm so blessed to me to be a woman. And I love men. I love men. I
Yeah,
just love men.
I guess that's the
I
point we're
just
trying to make, that there's two different experiences. And right, we're saying
yes.
so if you give two different entities the same chart, it's gonna be different. That's I think that's all we're trying to say, and that we can gain some useful insights about appreciating those differences, because they can help us understand what it really means, what gender actually means, not our made up cultural ideas about it. But right, it's just imagining how your life would have been different if you were, it's the same way again,
Okay,
how your life
okay,
would have been
okay,
different.
Ricky, now I'm tripping on this. Okay. What is how is the chart experience be a penetrated life versus a penetrating life?
Yeah, there you go. There
That's
you
so
go.
trippy.
That's
That's what,
sun moon though. That's masculine feminine. I mean, it's saying it, but it's saying it more poetically. I love it.
oh my God, because
Okay.
go ahead, Debbie.
Oh, I just have to tell you this. And this is for Ricky particularly. My ex-husband, we were born the same day, same year.
No way, you married your Astro twin?
Yeah. Well, you know what, though? Well, first of all, he's a Leo rising. I'm a Virgo rising. There's a big difference in that. Huge, huge difference.
So
How are
earlier
you
I
similar?
said,
How are you different?
I was going to say earlier I said that there's a tendency for the sun to represent men in the life. And so just in this scenario, I can imagine that the same chart, but Leo rising, so he maybe can play more of the Leo to satisfy that sun.
Yeah. He was much more extroverted. But here's the thing, it doesn't work out if you both have Mars in the seventh house. Okay, that just doesn't work.
For that, that's a generational thing, right? That's completely a generational thing.
Wait, how so?
So there's something in Vedic astrology called the dosa mangala, and it's about mangala is their word for Mars, and it's something that they use part of their process for deciding should these two people get married. And if both people or neither have Mars in an angle or the eighth house, okay, then they say it's okay. If one person has Mars in an angle or the eighth house and the other person doesn't, they call it off right away. Okay? Because
Well,
right, but generate,
we both have an angular Mars.
but
That
that's what I'm saying. That so they would have said it would work, but I'm trying to understand. I'm trying to explain why. Okay, because if there's Mars in one person's seventh and not in the others, it's easy for one person to become the victim and the other person to become the perpetrator.
Hmm.
If Mars is there, right? My favorite image for Mars in the seventh, sparring partners.
Hmm.
Sparring partners. And I think now that women are more equal to men, that we really see examples of sparring partners, right? Back like this idea of even the idea of a woman couldn't be convicted of statutory rape, right, was around for a long time. And I'm just talking about women's ability to use Mars, right? Culturally sanctioned ability to use Mars.
I'd be curious to hear about you and your twin husband. It's kind of kinky to marry your twin. No, I'm just kidding. Sorry, I shouldn't say that. I shouldn't say that. This is adult school. Okay, but no, but like, how did he express the Mars and Pisces differently than you? Like, w do you have any commentary on that?
I think it was more about the ascendant. his okay, I really do believe. For me, I think I overanalyze things. I was because I have Virgo rising. I'd say most of it was my fault in the way I did not want to be with him. He just maybe he would there was too many things about him that it felt boring. It felt not right. It just didn't feel right. It just wasn't enough for me with him. And with him, his son, the sun was the ruler of his chart. And so it was just he was too much and not enough. I don't know if that makes any sense, but
Well, in
he
the
just was
composite chart, you
That's
guys had a sun square Saturn. Sorry.
but in the natal chart, there's Sun square Saturn. So I say the
So in their
men represent. But I'm saying in the natal chart because I'm saying men represented by the sun. If a woman has the Sun square Saturn in the chart, what I say there's going to be a tendency to feel that men are not enough. That's what I'm saying.
Whoa,
Yeah.
whoa, mic drop on that one.
hmm.
Which
Yeah.
I'll use a horse as a mic. Um, oh my gosh. Okay, well, okay, we have 3 minutes. Now, let's see. The last question I'm going to ask you really quickly, Debbie, is do you consider the political climate when you're reading a chart?
Yes.
Whoa, okay, we got one there. So what do you consider there?
Uh, b- Based on like same like I was telling you about what happened back in the 60s is the same thing. Whatever's going on now affects us as a collective, but on a collective, we are all part of that collective. We are part of it on a singular level of uh, how we project out into that collective. And so politics is part of that, you know, it's the 10th house. It's up there, you know, it's part of like you know, how are we growing towards that? What is our participation in manifesting what's going on in this world, you know, politically, collectively, it's all to me that is important because whatever's going on politically is going to be effective. It's going to affect people either one way or the other, particularly now in this particular time. It's very, very divided, you know.
Now, I'm gonna make a very controversial statement. But before I do that, I will ask a question. All right. So do you feel more like a Leo or do you feel more like an Aquarius?
Aquarius.
Okay. All right. Sun in Leo, the moon in Aquarius. Right. And I'm saying if we were talking to a man with your chart, even if the ascendant was Leo, and we asked him if he felt more like a Leo or Aquarius, my guess is he would say a Leo. And so at the same chart, and I think the chart doesn't describe a person, the chart describes a person's life. So they have a different orientation to life. And maybe one of the reasons I trip on gender is because I have a twin sister.
Oh, the plot
Oh,
thickens.
wow.
Huh.
Yeah.
Are you going to marry her? I'm just kidding. So what's the controversial statement? Is it that
I
the
thought
guy,
I already made it.
oh,
Right.
that the guy would identify with his,
Well, when you look at it, when the idea of gender and chart, right? If I'm looking at a woman's chart, I'm looking at the sun, but I'm focusing more on the moon when I'm
gotcha.
thinking about describing her. Because the chart describes the life, but where someone identifies or orients themselves to that life, right? But to me, that's identity, right? Because we can see the chart, but what part of the chart are you identifying with?
Interesting. Well, Debbie, okay, I have to tell you, of all of our guests, we fought with you the most. So I just want to say thank you for having a Mercury opposed Mars so that Ricky would get on the battlefield with me because I have a Mercury square Mars. So, Debbie, I love you. I can't wait to see you.
I I loved all of this. Thank you so much, Andy. I love you too. And I love you too, Ricky. You're
Oh,
good.
yeah, this was fun. Thank you.
All
It
right,
was
what?
fun.
I think next week we got Sam Reynolds. So,
Oh, yes.
pull up your star pants because we're going to the big leagues.
All righty, I'll be ready.
All right, I'll see you all next week.
All right.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.